Welcome, everyone. I'm Kay Chopard. I'm the Executive Director of the Kantara Initiative. I've been there not quite a year, and I'm very pleased to be able to talk to you today. Thanks for coming in. I was originally, you may have seen in your program, another person was going to be presenting with me, specifically talking a little bit more about our DEI initiative, which I'll talk about later, but she's ended up being sick, I think likely with COVID. So there you go. It's the story of all of us here, huh? So anyway, I am relatively, in my words, new to the identity industry. I'm actually a lawyer by training. I'm based in Washington, D.C. I have worked a lot on legal policy and national and international policies in a variety of ways, going way back 10 years. If any of you remember NSTIC, the National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace. I see people shaking your heads. Yay, you all know what I'm talking about. And I got involved at that time and helped set up the first sort of attempt at a public-private partnership around that strategy called the Identity Ecosystem Steering Group, IDSG. And IDSG, ended up going by the wayside. But that said, there was a lot of good work done, and I was very pleased when last summer, right about this same time as Identiverse, the board of directors of Kantara recruited me and brought me in to be the executive director. And so it's been terrific. And with me, I have a couple of our work group chairs, including Andrew Hughes, who is also the chair of our leadership council, and Alec Laws. Alec is chair of our user-managed access UMA work group. And we'll talk about all of that in a minute. So can I just see a show of hands? Are there people in here who are already Kantara members? Anybody? Okay, there's a few. All right, are there some of you folks who've never even heard of Kantara? Anybody? Several people. Okay, well, good. That helps me know that I'm gonna hopefully have this, whoops, yikes, set to the right information for you. So the Kantara Initiative is a nonprofit organization. It's a member organization. Its members are a mixture of individuals as well as companies. And we have work groups that work on a variety of topics, which we'll talk about a little more here. But the other thing that Kantara does, which is a little bit unique, is that it is essentially a certification body, and we do what we call an assurance program for identity assurance levels 2 and 3, authentication assurance levels 2 and 3. You may have heard them shorthand, IAL2, AAL2, as well as federation assurance levels. We actually do third-party certifications for that. We are the only ones in the US who do that against the NIST 863 standard. And if you are interested in doing something like that, we would have a third-party assessment done and then a review, and then you actually are issued a special trust mark. And many of the companies who've gone through that program are able to leverage that into a variety of contracts where that kind of assurance level is needed in the work that they're doing in terms of credential service providing. So that's just a little background about who we are. I want to take you a little bit more through the nuts and bolts here about our vision, our mission, why this really matters, what our value proposition is. I'll give you a little background on who we are and how we're structured, what we do, and then I also want to talk to you a little bit about what are our current strategic initiatives and why people choose to belong to Kantara. So this is our vision and our mission. And you see there's places where it overlaps, but I think in many ways our vision is for something much more far-reaching and a high level, the equitable and transparent exchange of identity and personal data for mutual value. Our mission is to grow and fulfill the market for trustworthy use of identity and personal data. And I'm going to come back to this in a couple different places so you can kind of see how that vision and this mission works its way through the work of the organization. Why this matters? You see, this flowchart is intended to help you see what you probably already know because you're here at Identiverse, which means you're already working in the identity industry. So you understand that citizens have to manage multiple IDs. There is often not interoperability between sectors. What do I mean by that? If you look at the photos here, the financial sector, government, transportation, healthcare, all of these different networks are often not interoperable. And so what we're trying to do is sort of focus on how can we decrease the confusion, increase the security, and somehow tackle the lack of trust, which I would tell you that I think it's fair to say that Kantara is really all about trust, and that's really forms the foundation of the programs that we have to offer. And so it was very timely that Identiverse theme this year is all about trust. So how do we enable trust and interoperability? One of the main things is that we accredit, as I mentioned before, identity systems to a consistent standard that conforms to industry best practice. You see this Kantara Identity Assurance Program that I talked about that really underpins everything. And we try to create value for a variety of stakeholders. And if you look at our membership, it's much more focused on solution providers, right? Which is the Kantara accreditation, which underlines the confidence in the solution of choice. It applies consistent standards, right? We provide a stable framework. And I know that my two folks here can talk about this in even greater detail than I can. But I think what's important here is that what the solution providers are doing are really feeding into what consumers want and need, right? So how do we give them a peace of mind? How do we give them awareness? How do we increase their confidence? And the expectation of trust demands accountability and fairness in the system. Those are very much underpinnings of what it is we're trying to do. Consumers don't show up as members, per se, in our organization, and yet we're always looking at what do they need? How are we responding to that? And that, in turn, feeds into relying parties. I will tell you that more and more, we are, at least in Washington, we are working more and more closely with relying parties as they recognize that what consumers want is something they have to be cognitive of, so they're building it into what they're providing as well. The interoperability of trust frameworks eliminates the vendor lock-in and improves the project quality and return on investment. And so let me keep going here. So you kind of see this whole cycle. This is who our leadership is. I don't know if you'll recognize any of these folks. This is the board of directors. You'll see that we have officers now. For those of you who've been around for a while, we didn't always had some of these, but in addition to myself, and Matt Thompson is the current president of the board, we have a vice president specifically for the assurance program, which is Maria Vecchino. We have a vice president specifically for member engagement, which is Pat Clancy, working specifically on what's the return on investment, what's the value proposition for our members. And then we have other representatives from throughout the industry. This is how we're structured with the board of directors. Obviously, I am hired and fired by them. And then we have our assurance review board, which operates as a separate independent entity. It makes its own judgments, decisions, recommendations about whether or not companies are conforming to NIST 863. The Leadership Council, I mentioned Andrew Hughes is with us, and he is the chair of the Leadership Council. And also Alec. You'll see these are some of the work groups that we have. The one on the bottom here, User Managed Access, Alec is the chair of that. And then we have programs, specifically our trust operations. Let me see what our... So at this point, these are some of our activities. I'd like to turn it over to Andrew and Alec maybe to talk a little bit about their perspective, what they do, and what the value is that they see in the work that they're doing with Kantara.
Thanks, Kay. So it's a good thing I was in the audience and you found me. So I'm Andrew Hughes. I'm Director of Identity Standards at Ping. And I'm the Leadership Council Chair. Leadership Council is all the chairs of all the working groups for Kantara. Just like to highlight a couple of the working groups that are ongoing right now and have a high interest level from industry. The first one is probably our flagship working group, the Identity Assurance Work Group. So we have accredited assessors, credential service providers, identity verification companies, and several relying parties as well actively participate. And we write the assessment criteria that credential service providers are assessed against for conformity to NIST 863 version 3, the digital identity guidelines from NIST. The discussions are very interesting, at least for me. We get into the nitty-gritty of how the credential service providers should and can conform to NIST 863. It's not a simple case of just reading that standard and inventing a business process. There are certain things you must go through to do that. And we've got a global focus as well. So our primary one is in the US, but we are regularly asked to contribute and comment on trust frameworks and digital identity frameworks from countries around the world, because we're seen as a gathering point of expertise in that industry. Another work group I'd like to highlight, it's the Privacy Enhancing Mobile Credentials Work Group. Oh, actually, before I do that, I should say what work groups actually do. That's probably a good
Good idea.
Yeah, nice. So besides talking, we actually do work, strangely enough with the name. We write reports and recommendations. Reports are usually a survey of the industry on a specific topic. A recent one from our Privacy Enhancing Mobile Credentials Work Group that I will describe soon assessed the privacy features and things we're missing for the mobile driver's license standards that are coming out of ISO. Those standards are technical in nature. They don't handle the privacy protective processes that issuers, relying parties, service providers, and builders of applications should implement in order to be considered good actors with people's personal data. So that's a report that came out. And with the Privacy Enhancing Mobile Credentials Work Group, and I know I'm sort of drifting around a bit, the current work that we're working on is what are the actual requirements on issuers and relying parties for the protection of personal information and proactive privacy enhancement for people holding mobile credentials, including driver's license. So again, reports and recommendations is what we tend to, is what we do in the work groups. And I think I covered PEMC. Anyways, we invite anyone to join, okay? Come talk to us afterwards. If you're interested in those topics, we've got more working groups to talk about. But we're always looking for industry expertise, vertical industry expertise as well. So if you are an issuer of mobile credentials, come and join, because you'll be able to help define the rules and the requirements for your industry with respect to mobile credentials. That's kind of the promise we give you. And I'm going to call Alec up to the stage now to talk a bit about the User Managed Access Workgroup.
Thank you, Andrew. So I'm Alec Laws. I'm the chair of the User Managed Access Workgroup. I work at a company called Identos from Toronto. So User Managed Access is maybe one of the older work groups that exists at Kantara, something like 10 plus years. And I've been the chair for about one after Eve Maller handed it off to me about a year ago. So in the User Managed Access Workgroup, although we produce a specification that's around user-centric ecosystems and how we can go beyond just taking OAuth and applying it directly, but driving to those wide ecosystems, creating those larger solutions for everybody to work together. We also focus on that conversation a lot, like how we can create user-centric ecosystems. And I think there's a big shift in our industries, lots of industries, financial and health, towards those things. And we try to think through and talk through together the challenges that we're seeing with our customers, it is a lot of solution providers in our group, but we're working directly with consumers and relying parties to build these ecosystems out ourselves, and with the goal of eventually, putting them together and creating more value for people. So our group, like Andrew said, we do work too, looking at ways that we can extend our specification and drafts, or looking at other industry standards that are emerging and seeing how we can put them together into something that's bigger than the sum of the parts. We also talk a lot about beyond just the technology, so how, what we call like the bolts, the business, operational, legal, technical, societal impacts of what we're building. And when I came to Kantara, it was really sort of a breath of fresh air in these industries, not just these technical discussions, but how we're actually going to drive value for people and build these user-centric ecosystems out so that everybody can get the best of everything, right? As we see with like privacy-enhancing credentials and OAuth 2 and SSI, like how is it all going to fit together? And that's a big focus for our group as we just sort of discuss right on the edge of the, everything that's coming out together. So,
Perfect.
One more?
One question for you.
All right.
How has your company benefited from being part of the?
So our company's about maybe 5 years old, like 2014, 2017 is when we really started entering the identity industry. And at that time, we were trying to figure out what we were going to build at all, right? So Kantara was a place, and the User Managed Access Group was a place that I was able to come and learn and sort of just have a sounding board for my ideas about how we could have privacy-respecting wide ecosystems. We work a lot with healthcare and government, so finding like-minded people that were trying to do the same types of things and be able to have that two-way conversation around, this is how we're approaching it, how are you guys doing it? How is that going to fit together in the future? So really a lot about having other people that are willing to listen. Everybody's very open and willing to help you work through your ideas. Every call, I definitely open the floor up. I want people to bring their stuff, not just the agendas that we have, for example. So really that open collaborative space for industry experts, other people. We have researchers join who are interested in fine-grained authorization, just bringing it all together so that you have a really open, fun space to discuss your problems and get feedback from other people who are working through similar things. Yeah.
Very good. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Kay.
Thank you both. Well, if you look at this slide, obviously they've talked a lot about working groups. You can tell that there's opportunities at Kantara to get involved also in workshops and conferences, just like the two of them. They walked in the room and immediately got snapped up to come up here and talk with me. But there's lots of other opportunities. Later on at Identiverse, I'll be doing another presentation with another member of the Kantara organization. I think it's fair to say that it is very collaborative, and I find that the members are very supportive. But just so you know, I mean, as a nonprofit, and as a membership organization, we do have dues. That's partly how we have money so that we can do anything. But we don't want that to be a barrier to participation. So in all the work groups that they've talked about, you have the opportunity to sign up and participate in those work groups, even if you aren't a member of the organization. We'll make you sign a little agreement that says, antitrust and copyright and all those things. But you're welcome to join, even if you're not sure at this point if you actually want to be a dues-paying member. As I mentioned, we do the assurance program, which is really sort of a star program of ours. We also partner in liaison with a lot of different groups. And Alec talked about their work, right, which is in the healthcare industry. So just to use that as an example, I do a lot of work with the Health and Human Services Department. And as the Office of the National Coordinator has come out with a trust framework in terms of healthcare providers and how they are sharing information, including how they are doing identity proofing and so on, they've actually mandated that our assurance program is required by all the vendors who will participate in that. I see some heads nodding, so some of you are perhaps aware of that. But I think it's important to note that there are more and more industry verticals that are realizing that identity basically permeates every industry vertical. And while we don't have necessarily good interoperability It is the same issues and the same concerns, the same concern for privacy, the same concern for security that needs to happen in every industry. And so we are very, very heavily involved. Anyone in the healthcare, you may have heard of the Karen Alliance, which is a very powerful organization that really influences a lot of the healthcare policy, at least in the US. And they have embraced us as a full partner, and we participate in all the work that they're doing. So there are other liaison groups I could probably point to, but I don't want to prevent you from getting to lunch, so let's keep talking. The other thing that I wanted to kind of show for you is some of our strategic objectives. And Kantara is very much a member-driven organization. And so the input of the members has been about what are some of the things that are important to you. And one of the first things is the modernization of 863. Version 3 is what we have now. For those of you who follow the NIST standards, version 4 will be coming out yet this year. And so we have had ongoing conversations to hopefully inform some of the decision making at NIST, discussions with them about what are some of the more critical issues, so that hopefully the standard will be modeling what it is that's happening in the technology world today, and to try to be up to date and be current. So that's one of our top priorities. Another strategic objective is really around growth, including international expansion. So for example, Kantara Initiative has now opened an office in the UK, based in London, and we have been selected as the certification body in the United Kingdom for their, I'm not going to get this right, I'm looking right at Nick though, because he's going to help me. Digital Identity and Attributes Trust Framework. Thank you. So we are now a certification body there as well as in the US. It's similar. We actually in the US, the NIST standards, Kantara, long before I came along, created the Identity Assurance Framework based on that NIST standard, and that's what we continue to use. The UK model is a little different. Theirs was created by the government entity, actually, but we have been brought in to be one of the certification bodies for that there. And we have several companies, some of you, if you're interested in this, who have base operations or are providing services in both the US and the UK, as well as other countries, and that's certainly something that we would love to help you with if you're interested. The third thing is member engagement, continuing to try to make sure that we're looking at cutting edge issues. You've seen from, if any of you were here in the last session, there's a lot of different groups working on a lot of the same issues. And what we hope to do is to add to that, to be supportive, to be collaborative, to be beneficial, but work together without reinventing the wheel. And so that's a really, there are a lot of areas for member engagement on any of the topics that might be of most interest to you. And then the fourth priority is on diversity, equity, and inclusion in identity verification solutions. I think I have some more slides on this, so maybe, let me come back to that. We've seen, if any of you are ID Pro members, I know that ID Pro does a survey and they ask about this. It's very focused on the individual. Kantara is very focused on the market, on what companies are doing, and much less on individuals per se. So we have a survey out that I want to talk to you about before we leave today. So this is just an overview of our Identity Assurance Framework. As I mentioned, this was what the Kantara organization, before my time, put together in order to really execute on and implement the NIST standards. You really needed that set of rules, and then also we have a whole set of criteria which companies are assessed, their solutions are assessed against to see if they meet those NIST standards. And as I mentioned before, we're the only organization in the US, not in the UK, there are other certification bodies in the UK, but that really assess against that. And consequently, I want to throw out that what that also means is that there's much more emphasis on having integrity in the program, on impartiality, on making sure that we are, if you will, technology or solution, what do I want to say, agnostic, right? So we're not promoting certain ways of doing things. What we're promoting is that you meet the NIST standards. And this is kind of an overview of what the program looks like. The Kantara Assurance Review Board is an independent body, and it is subject to, as you see, conflict of interest, NDAs. It is very confidential. Their meetings are not open to the public because they are looking at the identity solutions of companies who want to get this certification, who need an IAL2 or an AAL2 certification, right? So that's a very confidential, closed process. I will tell you that we have representatives from government organizations like NIST and academia and other auditors, people in those kind of functions. So it's a very, let's just say the brain power in that group is, way beyond my level. So anyway, so they really oversee the whole thing. Subject matter experts are also part of the review team. If you see the accredited assessors, we use third-party assessors. They are required to go through an accreditation process. That is an annual process. They have to show that they have all kinds of things in place to make sure that they are also impartial, that they are up to date, that they know how things work in the field so that when they're assessing these things, they know what they're looking at. And those standards continue to get revised and updated. Now that we are doing accreditations also in the UK, we are going to be implementing some of the standards that they require in the UK into the US program. So we're continuing to make sure that we have the highest caliber assessors. And then those, you see the CSPs, there is a specific process. We try very hard not to play, hide the ball. This is not a gotcha. We want you to get there. So that means sometimes working with companies to make sure that if they have minor nonconformities, that there's a plan for how to remediate that so that they really are meeting the NIST standards. And then I don't think that Andrew mentioned that he's chair of the Identity Assurance Work Group, IAWG, which really works to make sure that our classes of approval and as I mentioned, the criteria are all current and up to date and are clear, hopefully to help people. What am I doing on time? This is just another depiction of the third-party assessment we do. The approval, once the assessors are done, they provide a report. It's very detailed. It does not, how do I want to say this? It doesn't sort of open wide whatever the technology solution actually is, right? So there's no sharing of that, of the actual solution in terms of the detail. The assessor would have to look at that, but the Assurance Review Board doesn't see that. Instead, what they look at is, do they meet the standards? And then the trust marks are given on a 3-year cycle, which means that there's a full-blown assessment done in year 1, and then in years 2 and 3, we look at a portion of the criteria to make sure you continue to be in conformance. This is just a little bit about the UK program. The certification in the UK includes, as you see, identity service providers, attribute service providers, and orchestration service providers. I mentioned their trust framework, and currently they're applying it to some very specific legislation in the UK regarding right to work, right to rent, and disclosure and barring services. The flow of the certification in the UK is a little bit different. And much of this is because this is very much driven by the Department of Culture, Media, and Sport, DCMS, and they are driving what they want this process to look like. Whereas in the US, the NIST, as you probably know, is not a regulatory agency. So while it sets the standards, it doesn't have the ability to promulgate regulations to enforce those, which is why many years ago, working with FICAM and GSA, Kantara was actually accredited to do that. This is just an overview of some of the reasons that companies choose to join. Besides the accreditation and the trust marks that we give, they also, there's a lot of opportunity to participate in policy development, especially at the global level, including ISO and other standards organizations. So if you have an interest in that, there's definitely a lot of opportunity there. We also really want to be sure that the identity systems that we are promoting or certifying, whatever, are privacy enhancing. That's really a critical factor for Kantara. And then we have the opportunity to collaborate and innovate for companies who want to participate and to work on some of the interoperability, which might be across sectors or it might be among various countries as well. This is a little bit, you'll see, of the membership. I feel like every time I show this, it's always out of date because we seem to continue to have new members coming on board. We also have some members who aren't listed because they've asked for their own reasons that they not be have their logo posted there, but they're, we have many large organizations, I'm sure people that you know who participate individually. And so sometimes your company might not be interested, but there's still opportunities for you as an individual to participate. Again, you have the opportunity to really participate in policy development if you're interested in that. The active participation in the working groups, Alec talked about how it's made a difference for him and for his company, his organization. You really have a chance to work with peers very transparently in what is a very highly collaborative environment. So if you want to have active discussions, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be writing things or doing code or anything like that, but you really have the opportunity to be very much a part of those discussions and a part of the thought leadership on the Kantara platform. And there are opportunities to speak. I'm always looking for people who'd like to participate like this in this and other conferences. So for the DEI, I wanted to talk about this just in a little bit more detail. So if you, and I don't think maybe I do. Okay, so if you look at, in the center there, our vision, right, for equitable and transparent exchange of identity and personal data for mutual value, that was written before we had a DEI initiative, right? Nobody even was thinking that we should have some kind of committee that focuses on that, and yet that was already written into the vision. So I think it was very telling that this is clearly an area that is of interest because it makes the market better, because it makes solutions better, all kinds of good reasons, right? And then what we're trying to do is work on both the demand and the supply side of this to see what this looks like. So we have put out a survey, and I'm just going to walk you through it, whether you, I don't know. I hope this is helpful. The reason I'm doing this is because we have sent this out. We would really like as many people as possible to participate. And here's the big thing. I had a lot of people asking me questions, and I finally realized you do not have to have solved the equity issue to respond to this survey, okay? I'm not looking for somebody who says, I have the silver bullet. Not interested. Probably wouldn't believe you if you said you did, right? So this is really, it's completely anonymous. We will be doing a report that's public. What we're trying to do is begin to collect data so that we have some place to start. And what I'm finding with a lot of organizations is they're telling us we're just now talking about it, right? We haven't come up with how we want to proceed. We have some people who've said, well, what we've decided to do is to hire some people and be a little bit more focused on diversity in our hiring because we hope that's going to impact our solutions and what we provide. And then we have other people who are doing actual research. And so the survey, you answer what you can. Like I said, it's completely anonymous, and the goal is really to get a sense about where the industry is. And I think once the report comes out, people will kind of get a sense about where they are, and I think we're going to find very few that are at this high end who feel like they've really solved for this, and instead we're going to find more of sort of a line about what people are doing. But our focus is on the marketplace. Are people seeing a return on investment? How much are people spending on this? Like I said, it's much different than what ID Pro does because it's really not focused on individuals. It's really focused on companies and really trying to get a better sense about where do things stand and maybe where they seem to be heading. What are people thinking? So I will look to, what else do you want to say? We have a few minutes before lunch, but anything you want to add? Any questions? Yes, sir.
Chris Chamberlain, U.S. government.
Oh.
You use the term privacy enhancing. I've heard a new term lately called privacy PET, privacy enhancing technologies. Is there a are you just going to get in? Are you going to stay in the enhancing world, or are you going to get into the actual technology world?
Well, I'm going to ask Andrew to respond because he is very engaged with the group working on those issues.
I don't know how to answer that one, though. So privacy-enhancing technologies is a relatively mature term. It's been around for a while, and it does what you might expect. It's the technologies to help enhance privacy, as the name suggests. What we're looking at in the privacy-enhancing work of the mobile credentials work group is really around the policy. So what are the requirements for those organizations to enhance the privacy of individuals? It might involve some technologies, but we're really focused on the policies first.
Good question. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Andrew's getting his exercise today.
Hey, Jeff, I think this question is for you, Andrew. Paul Dietrich from GS1. I just had a question about your work groups and the membership. Like, what are their day jobs? Are they engineers? Are they policy people? Are they marketing, business development? Where are they coming from out of your organizations?
Yes to everything. It really depends on which work group and what topic. So for Alex's group, User Managed Access, there are developers, there are, give me some words. Policy? Yeah, there's policy people, standards people too. Right? Right, so people that are looking for the technology described by the specifications for implementation. For the identity assurance work group, it's all things assurance. So we have assessors, we have identity verification companies. The mix of people, I mean, most of us are on the practitioner side. So we have day jobs at companies that have to use the outputs. We don't have a lot of people that are just there to hang out. Because it takes time. I mean, we're talking about weekly meetings usually, because we have to deliver on a schedule, because we depend on the outputs. One thing about the identity assurance part is that we do have international governments looking at our work. They don't always participate, but they're certainly paying attention when material comes out, when we raise issues in certain areas. So, for example, this work on the modernization of 863, that's a pretty hot topic around the standards world for identity assurance. Technology and time has moved on for 863, identity assurance and authentication. And the modernization needs to take into account more dynamic environments. Really fully embrace mobile first as a concept with authentication, that sort of thing. Did I come close to answering your question?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Good. Another good question. Anyone else? Yes.
Yeah, this is Tony. I'm pretty new to this. You mentioned that you guys also do coding for this group, or just for standard?
Just for standards. Yeah, I don't think we do any coding. Is there any
Or
group that does?
solution providers, they need to do code to verify.
Yeah, so we don't have any code development, like software development activities, but the software developers and solution providers, some of them like to learn about the standards that are coming out and discuss with the assessors that might be assessing them later, so they can build their software to meet the standards up front.
So does the assurance come from certification only? Is that it? Because so like you're saying you provide assurance for a consumer given a service, and you provide that assurance via certification of the service. That's where, and also standardization.
You might be able to.
I'm not quite sure I understand the question.
Yeah, so the question is certification the main method of giving assurance to the industry and consumers? Well, yes and no. So for consumers it's for purchasers of identity proofing and authentication services. They tend to look for certification as the mechanism to communicate that their provider is doing the things they need to do. Kantara doesn't really have a consumer-facing brand. We rely on our members who are delivering services to agencies, companies, and consumers to establish those brands. You may have noticed on the members slide, we have, for example, MasterCard as just one of the examples. It's a well-known brand. Another one is IDEMIA. So IDEMIA might not be familiar to people in the room unless you're going through an airport checkpoint in the US. The readers that you have to scan yourself through are made by IDEMIA. So in the secure area, secure environment space, they're a very well-known brand, but they're not a consumer brand. So.
Right.
You got it, Mike.
Oh, I do. Duh. So, yes, and I was just going to offer another example. It's true. We don't really have a consumer-facing brand. So it's not like, consumers have heard of, the Good Housekeeping seal of approval, right? We don't have anything that is that well known. Maybe we will someday, but we're not there. But instead what we see is that companies, and I talked before about the healthcare industry. So if I'm a hospital, and I'm having to manage patient information, and I have to share patient information, identity becomes very critical for my patients, for patient matching, as well as for the doctors, the nurses, everybody who's responsible for touching that information, which is very confidential, which is regulated in and of itself, right? But so what we're finding is those healthcare providers are looking to Kantara to say, who can I trust that has an identity solution that meets those NIST standards? Because I know I can trust those standards. So if I can find companies that are certified to that, I can have that kind of assurance. And essentially what they're doing then is they're passing that on to their patients, to their consumers. You can trust our solutions. You can trust us with your identity because we're using only the people that are actually certified to do this, if that makes sense. So it's a little bit more tangential, but yet there is clearly a trust that they're able to share because they rely on us.
Do you see any of providers actually, now that they've got a certification, they have a trust mark, that they're going to, are you guys seeing anybody that want to assert my assurance?
So the question is, do we see any identity proofing companies and authentication companies claiming that they have a Kantara trust mark? Yes, they do.
Absolutely.
Especially when they go to compete for government contracts, because it's quite often a requirement that you must meet in order to bid at all.
And I think what I'm asking is asserting at the time they pass their assertion.
A technology claim.
Are we actually seeing people doing that, right? Asserting, and I've proved to you in an IAL 3, right?
Right now, there isn't a well-established mechanism for doing that. There is work ongoing.
You guys would know, which is why I asked the question.
Yeah. At OpenID Foundation, the OIDC for eKYC and identity assurance, it's basically describing the metadata of proofing. So having the proofing agent, or describing to the relying party what steps were taken, what trust framework was involved in the actual proofing activity. So that's coming. It's not here yet, but it's well underway.
That's one of those things about the one vertical, now we have the same principles we can apply to different verticals, right?
Yeah. The other thing that I've seen is, oh, is it time? Sorry. Just quickly, I know in the last group they talked, one of the presenters talked about dealing with the FBI. And last month I was at a meeting and one of the speakers was from the FBI CGIS group. And they're actually, this isn't consumers, right? But they're looking at law enforcement agencies and asking them to assert that they have IAL2 certification, that they're doing that. So you're seeing, and it's not a contract in the way that many contractors that we see have. They're sort of sharing that pipeline and they're saying, okay, if you're gonna have access to these criminal records, for example, we need to know that. They're not paying each other per se, right? It's just an agreement to share information. So that's a little bit different. Now that said, many of the companies that have been through the assurance program clearly have it written into their contracts that they will maintain that. Because it becomes a big deal if they're worried that there's an issue or on timing and everything. So it's a good question. Anyway, thank you all for coming and participating, and thank you for your great questions.